So today let's talk about Alec Baldwin, prop guns, movie guns, and what working in the movie industry is actually really like. In the past I've done several films. I've also got IMDb credit for being a prop master, an armor, associate producer, and a producer. When I worked on movies, I did several back in the early 2000s up to about 2011. Now, a lot of people are trying to give excuses for what happened, but there are no excuses. Every individual that handles a firearm is responsible for what that firearm does. So in the movie industry, you don't actually point firearms, blank guns at other people. You point them off angle from the people, and the camera angle makes it look like you're pointing it at them, but you're not really doing that. Now, to understand how the movie business works, you got basically four types of guns. The first one is a real gun, such as this Desert Eagle or one of these revolvers, and it's used to fire blanks. Now with a revolver, a mini shotguns, and rifles, you don't have to adapt the gun to use blanks. You just load and fire it the way you would with regular ammunition. For semi-automatic and automatic weapons, you have to adapt the gun to fire blanks. Otherwise, it will not operate. So if you want to slide to kick back, you want it to eject ammunition, things like that, what happens is you thread the inside of the muzzle and you put a blank restrictor in there. So what that is a threaded plug with a hole in it. And the hole is designed to let a little bit of the gas out. That way you have enough retained gas pressure to operate the gun, and then you remove the locking lugs or modify the locking lugs so that it operates as a blowback, whether it's lock breech or not. So when a blank gun is made from a regular gun, you cannot fire regular rounds through it if it's been adapted with the muzzle plugs. So on the set of the movie that Baldwin was working on, they had a regular revolver. And so what they would do is load blanks into this and fire them. Now what you have to remember is a blank is actually a live round because it has primer and powder in it. Some blanks are crimped on the end and they only contain powder. Some blanks have a wad or an overshot wad which is ejected from the gun. And when you fire these blank adapted guns, they eject material out of the muzzle, whether that's gas, bits of the cartridge case, the wadding, or just junk in the barrel. And if it's a human at close range, it can cause severe damage or death. So that's why actors don't point guns directly at each other. They point them off at an angle. Now, when they do close-ups of loading guns, they'll use dummy ammunition. And the dummy ammunition comes in three different types. You have one type where you don't have a primer in it. So if you're filming the front of the gun, you can see the bullets. And when you look at the other end, you notice there's no primers. So you know that's a dummy round. If you have a round that has a fake primer, usually the case is color-coded. That way you can tell what it is. And on a movie set, you don't have live ammunition that has bullets in it. You only have live blanks and dummy cartridges. So when we're talking about these weapons, the next kind you have is an actual blank gun. And a blank gun is designed in a way that it cannot be altered to take bulleted ammunition. I have a lot of these blank firing guns we used on different movies, and these are usually zinc castings, magnesium castings. They're very cheap, and under the law, they have to be designed in such a way they can't be modified to use cartridges that have bullets in them. Now, some of these blank firing guns, they will have a restrictor in the muzzle, and they'll have a rod in there where the barrel is solid except for a very small area. And those discharge from the front. So when the blank goes off, the gas and the particles escape forward. You have another type that's top discharging, and what they'll do is the barrel will actually be solid except for to like right in here, and they'll drill a vent hole there. I've only seen a very few of those used in movie productions. Those, everything vents up, and that way nothing will discharge toward the person that the gun's pointed at. But because most movies have rules and they enforce that you don't point guns at each other, I've very rarely ever seen the top discharging blank guns ever used. Now, I supplied NFA weapons to a lot of independent, low budget, no budget movies. And everybody tries to use the excuse that Baldwin had a low budget production and that's the excuse for safety. And that's not the case. The contracts I operated with, I always had the option, if I didn't think something was safe, I could pack all my junk up and leave. So if you saw something that was happening as a armor or prop master, you just call a stop to everything and the production stops. Now, in many cases, on high-end movies, you would have multiple copies of your prop guns. And the reason is, in a production like that, if you were working on a $300 million movie, you may be burning $1 million, $1.5 million a day with the set. So what would happen is you would have multiple copies of whatever prop guns you're using, and those would be in a locked container. And one of the issues that's coming up is they can't really say whether the firearms in that production were actually properly secured. And in every actor and every person is responsible for checking the weapon that they use. If you pull the trigger, you are responsible. Now, as a side fact, a lot of the gun control laws in the U.S. forbid the importation of machine guns and destructive devices for uses in movies. The Hollywood moguls, actors, and politicians forgot to write themselves an exception to the law. And that's one of the reasons a lot of the movie industry has moved out of the United States. So what happened between 1968 and 1986 is imported semi-automatics in a lot of cases were converted to machine guns and used in the movie industry. After 1986 and the Hughes Amendment, it became very limited where you could actually get a new machine gun and use it for a movie. It had to be produced as a post-sample by a manufacturer and used directly by the manufacturer. So in the 2000s, the last of the big weapon rental companies went out of business, where the heirs sold off that business. And the Stembridge Studios, they had around 10,000 guns in their inventory. Around 1,000 of them were National Firearm Act weapons, including machine guns, and then they had about 9,000 regular guns, such as single action, semi-automatic, shotguns, rifles. And that company had been in operation since the 1930s. So what happens today, for instance, this gun I have, this is a semi-automatic copy of the PPS 43. Most people looking at it couldn't tell the difference, especially if somebody was carrying it around. In the past, for some movies, I would take dummy receivers and assemble parts kits on them to make a non-functioning prop. And those could be carried by people in the background and nobody would know the difference. This is an actual live machine gun. I've used several of those as movie props in movies, both as functional and non-functional. And then this particular short barrel shotgun's a Winchester 97. This was a gun used in promotional stuff in advertising, and it was a copy of the sawed-off shotgun used in the movie Bullet. In the beginning scene of that movie, the hitman used this to kill Bullet's friend, and that provided the impetus for the rest of the movie. So you can see there's a lot involved in movie guns, movie production. Another thing I'd like to point out is no felons or people convicted of domestic abuse can handle firearms. So what would happen is you would make resin copies. They cannot handle firearms, and they can also not handle blank guns in most states. So if you had actors or movie personnel that were convicted felons or convicted of domestic abuse, they could only handle resin copies of guns. And I thought about making those again. We used to make those as props where you would cast a resin using, a real gun as a model. And what you would do is make a urethane mold of the gun, and then you would pour epoxy resins and other types of resins to make a copy, and then you'd paint them. And those are actually expensive to make. So a lot of what you see in movies where the people are not using the guns are actually resin copies of the gun, and they're painted to make them look realistic. The other type of thing you see is a foam rubber soft copy, where you'd use the same mold to make a resin copy, and you'd make a flexible foam copy. That way, if people were pistol whipping or hitting each other or dumping something out of a car, it would actually be like a rubber gun, but it would be very realistic looking. So everybody tells you you don't use live guns and bulleted ammunition in the movie industry, and that's not quite true. With several movie productions, I was asked to teach the crew how to actually shoot guns, and then also in post-production, the sound crew would come to my rifle range, and we would fire live guns so that they could record those sounds, because blank guns do not sound like the real guns with real bullets when they fire. So some movie producers will have you fire the guns under controlled conditions at a firing range where only sound equipment is there. So if you want to know more about movie guns in the movie industry, we can make more videos on that and talk about that a little bit and some of the stories I saw on sets. So please comment, rate, subscribe. We'll see you on the next video.